All right, so picture this. You're looking at a map of the Philippines, right? And you see all these little dots all over the place.
Thousands of them.
Thousands, right? And each one of these dots, it represents a barangay, like a small community.
Yeah.
And each one is unique, like a totally different vibe,
Mm.
different culture, different history, different everything.
Yeah, each one's like its own little world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how do you even begin to wrap your head around trying to share a message, a single message across all these different worlds? It's a huge strategic challenge.
It is. It's a fascinating one, too, when you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can't just blast out a generic message and expect it to resonate with everybody.
No way.
No, you got to get down to the nitty gritty of each community.
The heartbeat.
Yeah, the heartbeat.
That's actually a great way to put it, because that's what really got me interested in this document we're going to be looking at today.
Oh, yeah.
It's called Dulzy 7 Charting the Course.pdf.
Catchy.
Right? So it's basically a strategic plan for church planting in the Philippines. But what's really cool is the way they go about it.
How so?
Well, they've got this really interesting mix of using hard data, really smart data analysis.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then combining that with a really genuine focus on connecting with people, really understanding them on a human level.
So it's not just about the numbers, it's about the people behind the numbers.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to be diving into today.
Awesome.
How do you take this massive, diverse landscape and actually figure out how to reach people in a way that makes sense to them?
Right, because you can't just treat everyone the same.
Nope. No one-size-fits-all approach here.
Definitely not.
So that's our mission today, to kind of unpack how this strategic plan tackles this challenge, how they use both the data and the human element to really make a difference.
I'm excited to dig into that.
Me too. And I think there's a lot we can learn from this, even if we're not, church planters.
Oh, for sure. The principles they lay out are applicable to so many different fields.
Totally. Anything where you're trying to reach a large, diverse audience and create some real lasting impact.
Exactly. So where do we start?
Well, the document jumps right into the challenge right from the beginning. The sheer scale of the Philippines, all those thousands of barangays.
Yeah, that's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. And it's not just about covering ground. It's about understanding each community as its own distinct entity.
Like we were saying earlier, each one has its own heartbeat.
Exactly. And they call this out specifically in the document. They emphasize that each barangay is this vibrant ecosystem of culture, history, and deeply rooted spiritual aspirations.
Wow, that's beautifully put.
It is, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about dropping in and saying, hey, here's our message. It's about understanding what makes each place tick.
And how do they propose to do that?
Well, they lay out these two fundamental pillars of their approach, and this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay, I'm all ears.
So, pillar number 1, data.
Data.
Yep, data. And I know when you hear the word data, you might think oh, spreadsheets boring.
Yeah, not exactly the most exciting thing.
Right, but the way they use data here, it's really fascinating. They have this thing called the Philippine Church Update Database,
Okay.
and they describe it as their modern compass.
I like that.
Right, because it's this living map of all these barangays.
Okay.
And it tracks not just basic demographic info, but things where the church is located.
Right.
What are the specific needs of each community? Are there certain areas that are underserved, in terms of spiritual outreach?
So they're using data to kind of identify the gaps?
Yeah, exactly. Where are the opportunities? Where are the places that could really benefit from having a church presence?
That makes sense.
And they even go so far as to say that each data point on this map represents a story.
Whoa, that's powerful.
Right. It's not just a number. It's okay, this represents a family or a group of people with their own unique hopes and struggles and everything.
So they're trying to put a human face on the data.
Exactly. And this database, it's not just a one-time snapshot. It's constantly being updated.
Oh, okay. So it's a good dynamic tool.
Yeah, exactly. As new churches are planted, as things change in the communities, the database reflects that.
So they're always working with the most up-to-date information.
Yep. And they use this data in a bunch of really smart ways. For example, they talk about pinpoint accuracy in terms of resource allocation.
What does that mean?
So let's say you have limited resources, right? You can't just spread them out everywhere. You got to be strategic.
Right. Focus your efforts.
Exactly. And the database helps them do that. They can see, okay, this area has a huge need, but there are no churches here. So let's focus our efforts there.
So it's all about maximizing impact.
Precisely. And it also helps them avoid duplicating efforts.
Like if an area is already well served by existing churches.
Exactly. No point in putting more resources there when there are other places that are completely underserved.
That's smart.
It is, right. And they really highlight how this data-driven approach helps them bridge the gap between vision and action.
What do you mean?
Well, it's one thing to have this grand vision of reaching all these communities, but it's another thing to actually make it happen.
Right. You need a roadmap.
Yeah, and the database provides that roadmap. It's like, okay, here's the vision. Here are the specific steps we need to take to achieve it.
So it's grounding their vision in reality.
Exactly. And they list out some specific benefits of this approach, like, mapping need and potential. So not just where the needs are, but also where are the opportunities for growth.
Right.
And then precision in resource allocation, like we talked about, and then reflecting evolving narratives, which means that the database is constantly changing. It's reflecting the changes happening in these communities.
Yeah, that's crucial because things are always in flux.
For sure. And then they talk about bridging strategy and story, which I
Yeah.
think is really powerful.
How so?
Well, the database doesn't just capture numbers, it captures stories. It captures the aspirations, the challenges, the spiritual hunger of real people.
So it's bringing those human elements into the strategic planning.
Exactly. It's like, okay, we see there's a need in this area, but what's the story behind that need? What are the specific challenges these people are facing? What are their hopes and dreams?
And how does understanding those stories actually inform their actions?
Well, it helps them tailor their approach. Instead of just having this generic message, it's like, okay, we understand that this community is struggling with poverty, for example. So how can we address that? How can we offer support and hope in a way that's relevant to their specific situation?
So it's about being sensitive to the context.
Exactly. And they give some really concrete examples of how the database is used, like identifying areas with urgent spiritual need.
Right.
So places where there's like a real sense of like people are searching for something, and then also identifying areas that are primed for gospel impact.
What does that mean?
So these are areas where maybe there's already some openness to the message, or maybe there are certain factors that make it a good place to start planting a church.
So it's like looking for fertile ground.
Exactly. And the database helps them see where that fertile ground is.
That's cool.
It is, right. And they also talk about how the database reflects these shifting demographics, emerging social trends, and evolving spiritual landscapes.
So keeping them up to date on the big picture.
Yeah, like what are the major forces shaping these communities? What are the trends? What's changing? And how does that impact our approach?
It's like having your finger on the pulse.
Totally. And they give some specific examples of the kinds of community narratives that are captured in the database.
Like what?
Stories of resilience, like how communities have overcome challenges in the past.
Okay.
Stories of struggle, the things that people are dealing with on a daily basis.
Right.
And then stories of longing, that deep desire for something more, for hope, for meaning.
So they're really trying to get a holistic understanding of each community.
Exactly. And all of this feeds into their strategic planning.
So data is like the foundation of their approach.
In a way, yeah, it gives them this really solid understanding of the landscape.
But it's not the whole story, right?
No, definitely not, because data can only tell you so much.
Right. It can't tell you everything.
Exactly. And that's where the second pillar comes in the human element.
Okay, so we've got data and we've got the human element.
Yep, these are the two essential ingredients.
And how does the human element play out in their strategy?
Well, it's all about going beyond the numbers and actually connecting with people on a human level.
Okay.
So they emphasize that church planters need to immerse themselves in the communities they're trying to reach.
Like really get to know the people.
Yeah, like live among them, experience their culture, understand their values, their beliefs.
So it's about building relationship.
Exactly. And they talk about the importance of understanding the cultural context and local wisdom.
Because the Philippines is such a diverse place.
It is, right? It's like a melting pot of different cultures and languages and traditions.
You can't just come in with a one-size-fits-all approach.
Nope. You got to tailor your approach to each community. And they talk about the importance of building relational bridges.
I like that.
Right? It's about connecting with people on a personal level, sharing their joys and sorrows, celebrating their victories.
So it's about being present.
Yeah, and they have this really powerful line in the document. They say, trust is built not just through preaching, but through presence.
That's so true.
Right, it's about showing up. It's about being there for people.
It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Exactly. And they reiterate this idea that behind every number on that database, there's a family, there are people with their own unique stories and aspirations.
So it's about seeing the humanity behind the data.
Exactly. And this leads into the next part of their strategic plan, which is their 4-stage blueprint for transformation.
Okay, so we've got the two pillars, data and the human element, and now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of how they actually put this into action.
Yep, and these 4 stages, they're not like separate steps, they're interconnected, they build on each other.
Yep.
So stage 1 is data collection and analysis, which we already talked about quite a bit.
Right, that's the foundation.
Exactly. It's about using technology and databases to create this really detailed map of the spiritual landscape.
Okay.
And some of the key activities in this stage include identifying unreached communities, so places where there are no churches or very few churches,
Right.
analyzing demographics and cultural trends, so like what are the major shifts happening in these communities, what are things we need to be aware of,
That
and then assessing potential challenges, so like what are the obstacles we might encounter? Are there any geographical barriers, cultural barriers, anything like that?
So it's like a reconnaissance mission?
Kind of, yeah. It's about gathering as much information as possible so that they can go in with eyes wide open.
Makes sense.
And the goal of this stage is to bring clarity and intentionality to the whole mission.
Right, so you're not just wandering around aimlessly.
Exactly. You have a clear understanding of where you're going and why.
Awesome. So what's stage 2?
Stage 2 is contextual immersion. And this is where the church planters really become learners. They're going into these communities and they're trying to understand everything they can about the culture, the social dynamics, the everyday realities of life.
So it's about getting a feel for the place.
Exactly. And they talk about the importance of understanding cultural dynamics, like what are the values, what are the beliefs, what are the traditions that shape this community, and then
Right.
also understanding community structures. So like who are the key influencers, who are the leaders, who are the people that everyone listens to.
Got it.
And then also understanding the everyday realities. So like what are the challenges people are facing? What are their hopes and dreams? What are their daily struggles?
So it's about getting a really deep understanding of the context.
Yep. And they emphasize that this immersion is crucial for building trust.
Yeah, because you can't just come in as an outsider and expect people to open up to you.
Exactly. You got to earn their trust. And you do that by showing genuine interest, by listening, by being present.
So it's all about building relationships.
Exactly. And this leads into stage 3, which is strategic engagement.
Okay, so now we're getting into the actual outreach.
Yep. So this is where they take all the insights they've gained from the data and the immersion, and they start designing and implementing their strategies.
Okay.
And they emphasize that these strategies need to be tailored to each community.
Right, because what works in one place might not work in another.
Exactly. And they highlight some key characteristics of these strategies, like flexibility. So they need to be adaptable. They need to be able to change as the situation changes.
Okay.
Integration of structured discipleship and relationship building. So it's not just about preaching, it's about building genuine relationships with people.
Right.
And then emphasis on long-term presence. So it's not about quick fixes, it's about being there for the long haul.
So it's about building something sustainable.
Exactly. And they reiterate this idea that this stage is where the precision of the data meets the empathy of the human connection.
I like that.
Right. It's about using the data to guide your actions, but also being sensitive to the needs of the people.
So it's a balancing act.
It is for sure. And then the final stage 4 is sustainable transformation.
Okay, so this is the ultimate goal.
Yep. It's about creating lasting change in these communities. It's about seeing genuine spiritual renewal.
And how do they go about achieving that?
Well, they emphasize the importance of raising local leaders.
Okay.
So empowering people from within the community to take ownership of the church.
Right, because it can't just be outsiders coming in.
Exactly. It needs to be rooted in the community.
Yeah.
And they also talk about establishing self-sustaining churches, so churches that can support themselves financially and otherwise,
Okay.
and then providing ongoing support. So continuing to offer mentorship training resources, just being there to help them along the way.
So it's not just about planting a church and then walking away.
No, it's about nurturing it, helping it grow, helping it become a vibrant part of the community.
That makes sense.
And they really emphasize that church planting thrives when local believers take ownership.
So it's about empowering people.
Exactly, giving them the tools and the resources they need to succeed.
I like that.
Me too. And this leads into the next section of the document, which is about the power of partnerships.
Okay, so they're recognizing that they can't do this alone.
Exactly. Church planting, it's not a solo mission. It takes a village.
Right.
And they emphasize the importance of collaborating with local leaders, educators, healthcare providers, community influencers, anyone who can help them connect with people and make a difference.
So it's about building bridges.
Yep, and they talk about how these partnerships not only help with the practical aspects of ministry, but they also foster organic spiritual growth.
How so?
Well, when you partner with people who are already trusted and respected in the community, it creates this environment of support and encouragement. People are more likely to be open to the message if it's coming from someone they already know and trust.
That makes sense.
And they reiterate those key principles we've been talking about: immersive engagement, contextual adaptation, long-term commitment.
Right, so it's about being present, being sensitive to the context, and being in it for the long haul.
Exactly. And this leads into a really interesting section where they talk about bridging tradition and innovation.
Okay.
So they're basically saying that this whole mission is about bringing together the best of both worlds, the wisdom of tradition and the power of modern technology.
Interesting.
Yeah, they talk about how data and technology provide clarity.
Okay.
Like, they help us see the big picture, they help us make informed decisions.
Right.
But they also emphasize that compassion and community are essential.
So it's not just about the tech, it's about the human touch.
Exactly. And they're really careful to point out that technology should never override relational engagement.
Right, it's a tool, not a replacement for human connection.
For sure. And they talk about how this approach empowers communities.
How so?
Well, by amplifying local voices, by prioritizing contextual relevance, by emphasizing sustainable growth through local ownership, it's basically saying, we're here to support you. We're not here to dictate to you.
Yeah. That's a really important distinction.
It is, right. And they see this methodology as a model for holistic change.
What do you mean?
Well, they say that the principles they're using here could be applied to all sorts of other fields like education, healthcare, community development, anything where you're trying to create positive change in a complex environment.
So it's about thinking outside the box.
Exactly. Taking these principles and applying them in new and creative ways.
I like that.
Me too. And then the final section of the document really brings everything together. They talk about how this data-driven strategy is dynamic.
What does that mean?
It means it's constantly evolving. It's not static. They're constantly using feedback from the database to assess and refine their approach.
So it's a continuous improvement process.
Exactly. And they conclude by saying that this mission demonstrates how faith and innovation can be complementary tools for life-changing impact.
Yeah, that's a powerful statement.
It is, right? It's about bringing together the best of both worlds to create something truly special.
So what's the big takeaway here?
For me, the big takeaway is the power of combining data-driven strategy with genuine human connection.
Yeah, that's a theme we've been hitting on throughout this whole discussion.
It is, right? And this strategic plan for church planting in the Philippines, it's like a perfect case study in how to do that effectively.
Definitely. And I think there's a lot we can learn from this, even if we're not, directly involved in church planting.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, the principles they lay out, understanding the landscape through data, engaging with communities on a personal level, building relationships, fostering ownership, those are all things that are relevant to pretty much any field.
Totally. Like, think about your own work or your own community,
Yeah.
Where could you maybe apply a more data-driven approach, but also make sure that you're not losing sight of the human element?
Right, because at the end of the day, it's all about people.
It is. And sometimes I think we get so caught up in the numbers and the data that we forget that.
Yeah, we lose sight of the human stories behind the data.
Exactly. And those stories, they're important. They're what make all this work worthwhile.
They are.
So that's something to think about, as you go about your day, as you're working on your projects, as you're interacting with people.
Yeah.
How can you find that balance between the data and the human element?
It's a question worth asking.
It is, for sure. And that's about it for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
See you later.
Bye.